Okay, so the reason why I wanted to show you how to create a dynamic drop-down list in the previous video was to kind of prepare you on how to create a dependent drop-down list, meaning that we can change the items in our drop-down list based on another cell's value. So a little warning, this one is a little bit more tricky than creating a dynamic drop-down list, but this is also very useful. So I want to show you, that way you can have it and refer back to this video if you ever have to create a dependent drop-down list. So let's take a look at our setup here. For our source, we have fruits in one column and vegetables in another. Our goal is to be able to select fruits or vegetables for the category cell, and depending on which category we choose, we'll change the drop-down list in the food column to include the items for that category. So our first step is to convert our data into a table. So that way, if we add any items to our table, it will also add it to our drop-down list. So let's select our data, and then come up to the Insert tab, and select Table. And check that my table has headers, and click OK. Now let's create a drop-down list for our category column. So we can click inside cell B3, come up to the Data tab, and select Data Validation. Then we can select our drop-down and allow from a list. And for our source, we can select our table headers, because for our category, we want to be able to select fruits or vegetables. So we can go ahead and select these headers and press OK. So now in our category drop-down list, we have fruits or vegetables. Now the next step is to create a name range for our table columns. Let's start with the fruits column. What we need to do is select all the cells within the fruits column, and then from here we can go up to the name box and type in a name, or we can go to the formulas tab and select define name. We have to name this range exactly how it's spelled in the category column, so either fruits or vegetables. But since we're doing the fruits column, we need to type in fruits. And we can tell that this name range refers to Table 4, which is the name of the table on this worksheet, and it includes the fruits column. We can click OK. Now we have to do the same thing to the vegetables column. So we need to select all the cells in the vegetables column, come back up to the formulas tab, and click define name. And remember, the name has to be an exact match to what's in our category column. And since we're in the vegetables column, we have to name it vegetables. And once again, we could see that it refers to Table 4 and includes the vegetables column. And then we can click OK. Now it's time to create a drop-down list for the food column. Now before we create this drop-down list, I do want to mention that we will be using a new function, which is called the indirect function. And what the indirect function does is that it accepts text values and evaluates them as cell references. Just as a quick example, I'm going to click in any blank cell on this worksheet. And then I'm going to insert the indirect function. So equals indirect. Now, like I said, the indirect function accepts text values and then evaluates them as cell references. So for text values, we had to put quotation marks, and if I put B3, close quotation marks, then close parentheses, watch what this function gives us. If I click enter, it gave us the value of vegetables. Well, now you might be thinking, why couldn't we just type in equals and then click cell B3 to get vegetables as well? Well, you got to remember, inside of our indirect function, we didn't just click cell B3. B3 was a text value, not a cell reference, because we put it in quotation marks. But the function evaluated that text value as a cell reference. Well, the power of the indirect function can map text to a named range. So let me show you how we can utilize the indirect function to create a dependent drop-down list. And hopefully you can get a better understanding what the indirect function actually does. So I'm going to clear out these cells and then click the cell in the food column, come up to the Data tab, and select Data Validation. And then we can select our drop-down and then choose List. And now for our source, this is where we will use the indirect function. So let's type in the equal sign and then type in indirect, open parentheses, and then from here we can select cell B3 because the items in this list depend on what category we choose. And then we can close the parentheses. So I know this could be a little bit confusing, but basically using the indirect function in our source is allowing us to reference a named range. Now previously, when we created our first drop-down list, I showed you multiple options that we can use as our source. The first option was to manually type in the items, separating them by a comma, or we could select a range of cells within the workbook. And the last option was to create a named range for a group of cells and then use that name in our source. So that's basically what it's doing here. Right now, this source is telling us that it's equal to vegetables. And after we converted our range of cells to a table, we created a name range for each column. One was fruits and one was vegetables. So depending on what we choose in our category column, our source will change to either fruits or vegetables. So let's click OK and see it in action. So if we come up here in our drop-down list, currently the category is vegetables, so the items in our drop-down list are vegetables. We got avocado, bell pepper, carrot, corn, potato. Now if we change our category to fruits, now our dependent drop-down list has apple, banana, mango, pear, and pineapple, which are the values in the fruits column. And since that we have our range of cells converted into a table, if we add to this table, let's say for fruits we put grape, and for vegetables we put tomato. If we go back to our dependent drop-down list, now grape is added to the list. And if we change our category to vegetables, now tomato is added to the list. So that's how you can create a dependent drop-down list. I know it was kind of a lot, and it might take you a few times to actually get it down, but as you can see, this is a very powerful and dynamic functionality that you can add to your spreadsheets and increase your productivity.